At the eastern edge of the Cape Floral Kingdom lies a belt of Afro-montane forests known as the Garden Route. The temperate climate and higher than average rainfall has managed to sustain forests of tall yellowwoods and lush undergrowth. It is clear that the plants adapted to grow here face completely different challenges as those in the western part of the Cape. The fynbos becomes fragmented and exists only in pockets between these green lungs. Nevertheless, the Garden Route is home to an extraordinary wealth of plants which remind us how the Cape must have looked like millions of years ago. It doesn't look like it, but I'm still in South Africa's fynbos region. This is the Tsitsikamma forests. A very small part in the fynbos region, but a very special part, a very unique part. Why is that? The climate. The climate here is different to all the rest of the fynbos. If you go more south towards Cape Town, you're next to the cold Atlantic Ocean, and that causes that area to be winter rainfall, meaning it's really hot and dry in summer and cold and wet and windy in winter. And here in the easternmost reach of the fynbos, the climate is mild, only second to Hawaii in the world. That means that our temperature hardly ever goes below 10 degrees or above 28. We have a constant feed of rain and moisture every week. And that means plants don't have to compete for water. They don't have to go dormant in a certain part of the year because of drought. They are evergreen. And when plants are evergreen, they grow bigger and they grow bolder. And one of the giants of the fynbos region, and here in the Tsitsikamma, is South Africa's national tree. It's called Podocarpus latifolius, or the real yellowwood. And this yellowwood here is one of the last remaining giants of the forest. So the giant yellowwood trees of the Tsitsikamma forest, also known as Kalanders, have been here for millions of years. They're an ancient tree, an ancient plant actually. Modern plants have bright big flowers of pollen and nectar attracting birds, bees and butterflies. But the yellowwood not. It came from a different, long ago past. A past where dinosaurs ruled the earth. Its fruiting body is different. It's a cone, like a pine tree or a conifer. They don't need birds, butterflies and bees to pollinate them. All they need is wind. And that is also why these guys are so big. Because the wind up there is much stronger than it is down here. And that is the way that their seeds spread. But these trees also have a checkered past, thanks to humans. In the early 19th century, the settlers here cut down these huge Kalanders by the thousands. The wood was very expensive and still is very expensive. Furniture was made out of it and it was shipped off to Europe. Luckily, law came into place just in time so that we still have a few of these massive trees in our forests and to enjoy and to appreciate. So this giant of the forest behind me could tell a story. Its story would contain parts where elephants would rub up against its bark to soothe their itchy backs. Elephants that are no longer here. It would tell us a story about when it was a teenager behind me and it was the rise of the Renaissance and the Ottoman Empire. Before any settlers came to Africa. It's a tree that boggles the mind. It's a tree that when you touch it, you touch time. In contrast to the ancient trees of the forest, the modern trees produced flowers. And that's because the emergence of insects came to roam the earth. And the trees, such as Calodendron capensis or the Cape chestnut, saw an opportunity for pollination, and so produced masses of flowers that tower high above the forest canopy. Not only does the color attract the insects, but also a scent produced by the tree. And that secures the pollination of the species, and so secure its future. So on the verges of the big forest here in Tsitsikamma is a plant that looks very tropical. This is Pomania africana, and the leaves are big and bold, and it's been used around the world as an indoor pot plant. But what's interesting to me about Pomania is not the leaves, but the flowers. The flower has this bizarre ability to rub its pollen onto its pollinator. So when the pollinator arrives at the flower, all the stamens are closed. The vibration of the pollinator, which would be a bee, would trigger all the stamens to start puffing out. Now when a bee visits the flower, it takes about 10 seconds for it to get all its breakfast. And in that time frame, the stamens puff out, covering, almost painting the bee full of pollen. So the bee would fly up to the next flower and the same thing would happen, covering it with pollen. So this flower is not taking any chances. It knows this is the opportunity, it needs to maximize on that and then do that mechanically. The rainfall is high and the conditions are favorable for growth. And that is the same conditions that we create in our gardens. And so a lot of the plants that grow here are used around the world as garden plants or pot plants. In the forests of the Cape, trees are enormous and they dominate the landscape. The shrubs are large and have massive leaves. But there's a reason for that. It's a constant fight in order to get sunlight, to photosynthesize and then produce food. And the plant that wins that battle is the most healthy and would be the most successful in the landscape. But on the forest floor, there are plants that have had to adapt because they're not as big. They will never get that big, but they need to be clever in a way that they can harvest the little bit of sunlight that still reaches the forest floor and thrive and be successful. There's one plant in particular that has done this on a tremendous scale, all around the world really, and it's a plant that we walk past that we don't even notice because it's just part of the landscape. But if we think about it, if you walk through a forest without this plant, it would seem strange. And that is the mosses. Mosses are probably the world's most primitive plant, but one of the most successful. It's all around the world, and a moss can thrive in low light. Mosses are different in the sense that they are only one cell thick. They are not vascular plants, meaning that they don't have veins, that they can't send up moisture through the whole plant and make it a sturdy, upright, woody structure. They grow in colonies, and the reason why that is they keep one another upright. They don't make seed, they don't make flowers, they make spores, the same as ferns. Ferns also be a very primitive and ancient plant group. Moss doesn't make flowers, they don't make seed, they have spores, which is the telltale sign of how primitive they are. same as ferns. So they've been on this planet for a very, very long time. And they will be on this planet long after we have gone. In the garden route of the Western Cape, the climate is mild. We have water for most of the year. The rainfall is high and the conditions are favorable for growth. And that is the same conditions that we create in our gardens. And so a lot of the plants that grow here are used around the world as garden plants or pot plants. And one of the plants that I really love is the Streptocarpus. And the one that I've got here is also growing epiphytic. Growing epiphytic means it's growing on trees. So the trees is its host to settle down on. It's not a parasite. It doesn't use the tree for any nutritional value. It's just there as a base to sit and grow and photosynthesize. Moss, again, is very important in this story. The Streptocarpus has very fine seed. That's where the name comes from. Strepto meaning twisted, carpus fruit, twisted fruit. And inside the twisted fruit is spore-like seeds, very fine, and get spread by wind. And that is where moss becomes very important in the story. Moss grow on trees and rocks, but they also collect debris, whether it's bird dung, whether it's dead insects, leaf litter, or even dead moss. They create a substrate which is able to sustain life for a seed to germinate, have enough moisture and just enough nutrition for the plant to mature and then makes its own food. And that is what happened here with this Streptocarpus. Streptocarpus can grow on soil or on rocks, but if the opportunity arises and the seed happens to land on a piece of moss that is conducive to growth, then they will do so. And this one did it beautifully. Streptocarpus also has an interesting way of reproduction. Not only seed, but you can use its leaves too. So in the horticultural world, Streptocarpus, to reproduce it, their leaves get cut. And every point where the vein in the center of the leaf is cut, a little baby will arise. This is Streptocarpus rexi, and this is the mother of all the hybrids that's been made from Streptocarpus. Streptocarpus is also family of the more North African species of African violets, or the St. Paulias. You get them in every color, shape and form at the moment. And South Africa's got a lot of species, but this is the first one that was discovered and closest to Cape Town, the only one in the Western Cape. It's an incredible plant and one of South Africa's most foremost exports when it comes to pot plants and color plants. And when we go to shows like the Chelsea Flower Show, you see massive stands of incredible floral displays of Streptocarpus, and usually they do win some incredible awards. And this is its home. This is the grandmother, great-grandmother of those beautiful hybrids we buy in our garden centers. It erupted this morning and the starfish tentacles exploded out. It's a red fleshy color. Inside is that glistening, dark, muddy, bloody juice. Forests are surrounded and full of big trees, shrubs and flowering plants. Now, like us humans, we shed our hair and our skin to make way for new. So the plants do as well. Large branches fall due to storms, or old leaves fall to the ground to make way for the new fresh ones when the season comes. And when that organic matter falls to the ground, it's full of energy, full of nutrition, and that needs to be absorbed again by the plant's new babies or the old ones. How does that happen? Because they can't absorb a piece of wood like this. It needs to be broken down and accessible for their roots to take up. And one of the organisms that does that is the fungi. Fungi is not part of the animal kingdom, and it's also not part of the plants. It's a whole group of living organisms all on its own. And mushrooms are essential to life on Earth. And in this little piece of branch, you can see that the mushroom is eating away and dissolving basically this branch. The wiry netting inside, that is the organism, that is the mushroom. These are just the fruiting bodies that's shooting out and spreading spores so that new mushrooms can spread. But there's a mushroom on the forest floor that's quite special. It's widespread in southern Africa. It only lasts for a day, and it's unique in every way. This is the stinky starfish mushroom, fungi, or Acero rubra. Acer means disgusting, ro means juice, and rubra red. So disgusting red juice. And in the center of this fungi, the fruiting body, there is a disgusting red juice, and it's pungent. It does smell like a rotting carcass. And that's the whole purpose of Acero. It attracts flies, and there's one eating the juice at the moment. So this morning, there was an egg-shaped organism underground. The temperature today was just right. It's not raining, and the humidity is also perfect. It erupted this morning, and the starfish tentacles exploded out. It's a red fleshy color. Inside is that glistening, dark, muddy, bloody juice with that strong scent. It immediately attracts the flies. It's quite a big amount of energy that this fungi needs to put out to attract the flies. But why is it doing that? Here at the bottom, low down on the ground, there's not much wind, hardly a breeze. Outside the forest, it's very windy at the moment. And fungi, mushrooms, do count on their spores to be carried by the wind, and so they spread. Acero doesn't have that luxury, so it makes a plan. And it imitates a dead carcass or dead piece of animal. The flies come and they walk onto that sticky juice. Now that sticky juice is full of spores. Now remember, fungi does not have flowers, although this look like a flower. It is not. It's a fruiting body. It doesn't need to be pollinated like plants. The spores are already there, ready to grow. All it needs is something to carry it from this position to the next so it can spread its species. The fly, after eating, its feet is full of the sticky juice, and that is in turn full of spores. It would sit on a different area in the forest, maybe on feces or on a branch, and so the spores are deposited. And so Acero spreads itself throughout the forest. Strelitzia reginae has striking orange and blue flowers, which can attract birds from afar. The birds, looking for energy-rich nectar, perch on the inflorescence at the right angle to reach deep down into the floral tubes to extract the sweet nectar. Upon standing on the convenient perch, the anthers are thrust outward from their resting chamber, brushing up against the bird's feet in the process. When the bird visits another plant with its feet covered in pollen, the process is repeated, and so cross-pollination is achieved. Strelitzias are unusual in that they use the bird's feet to carry its pollen from flower to flower. And in the garden route, we find a lesser-known giant Strelitzia, which employs a very similar pollination strategy. And this is Reginae's big brother, Strelitzia alba. It's a giant among Strelitzias. And Strelitzia alba only occurs here in the garden route. It's very rare. Strelitzia alba is one of 3 giant Strelitzias we have in South Africa. Strelitzia nicolai is all along the eastern seaboard, and it's worldwide use for tropical houseplants. Strelitzia cordata more towards the north of southern Africa. Strelitzia alba is massive because it grows in these forests. It's a fight, a continuous fight with all these big trees to get sunlight, because it needs to photosynthesize to make food and survive. As the Strelitzia grows and gets higher up the tree canopy and reaches sunlight, the leaves start to shrink and get a little bit more stocky, rounded and short. They are cup-shaped so that with a heavy rain, the rain gets funneled downwards quickly so it doesn't lie in the leaves and damage the leaves. This is a huge specimen. The branches here are about 20 meters long. Strelitzia alba, alba meaning white, these have pure white flowers. It's quite a beautiful plant here in the Western Cape and a very rare one, the only one in the fynbos area. So unlike Strelitzia reginae, that grows in grasslands and short shrubbery and has a lot of sunlight, Strelitzia alba has to become massive and a true giant here in the forests. The forest might sound peaceful and look beautiful and relaxing, but it's not. This place is a constant battle for survival, a battle for sunlight, and Strelitzia alba is surrounded by giants and thus has to become a giant itself to survive. In the fynbos region of the Western Cape, there are some plants that had a long relationship with the humans in this area, even before the settlers came. And not only for its beauty as a flower, but also for its nutritional value and medicinal value. And one plant in particular in the fynbos region stands out above all the rest, and that is Aponogeton distachys, or the Waterblommetjie. Waterblommetjie breedie is probably one of the Western Cape's most famous local dishes. It's proudly South African, and if you visit the Cape, it's a dish that you just have to try. They use the flowers for the dish, but that's not the only part of this plant that's been used. Before the flowers were even used, the tubers of Waterblommetjies was very important. It's very high in starch, so they would take out the tubers and cook it like we would cook potatoes. So even the stem of Aponogeton was used. It was taken out of the water and then all the sap inside was squeezed out, and that was used for treatment of sunburn and cuts. But nowadays it's all about the flower. And once the flower erupts out of the water, that is the juicy part that we use in our Waterblommetjie breedie. It gets harvested and pulled out. It's like quite a long stalk to it. But we cut it off once it's really nice and big. This is now end of the season. The plants are getting ready to go dormant. In the Western Cape, closer to Cape Town, it's adapted to go dormant because all the water sources go dry. And then they sit and wait until the new rain comes, and then they will shoot out. Here in the Tsitsikamma forests, where they also grow, they tend to go dormant too, but it's just to have a little rest. The water stays. The flower is cut and then used to cook with. But there's a bit of a life cycle to this plant. When we look at the flower, it's got that sweet scent. It's like a honey jasmine scent to it. It's not one flower, it's a huge big split bract that opens with loads of individual flowers. You can see the pollen inside, it's a dark color. The flowers will then set seed, and then the seed, once it's ripe, will float to the surface of the water. Most of the Waterblommetjies grow in the still water, where there's not high currents, because that's where they can settle down in shallow ground. But once the seed is ripe and it's released, as we can, here's a seed capsule, it's just released all its seeds, and the seeds float down the river. And once they reach a place in between shrubbery like this on the edge of the water, they settle down, but they already germinate in the water. They don't have to be planted. And here we have one. It's floating down the river. It's already shooting its taproots. Once it reaches a stable water environment without high currents, it sets its roots down and it attaches to the soil, and that's how the new plant starts. It's an easy plant, even in a garden situation, and it's naturalized in places like France too. A very proudly South African plant and highly nutritious, and one of my favorite dishes here in the Western Cape. In the next episode, we will take a look at a plant family which needs no introduction: orchids. These primitive plants have some of the most complex flowers on earth, each with its own unique pollinator.